I'm going to call the June 7th, 2010 work session together for the meeting today, and I wanted to first let everybody know that Commissioner Cabarrus has business and is not able to be here today, and Commissioner Privet called today and said that he was not feeling well, and he would certainly come if we needed him, but I said we'd rather not be sick as well if it's something contagious, so stay home. So that's the reason why Commissioner Privet and Commissioner Cabarrus are unable to be with us today. This time we'll start into the new business, which is G1, page 52. And I will turn it over to Mayor Kitts for the presentation.
Thank you for letting us come today. Part of what we would like to do is make sure that you know who's with us today. We have David Pugh, our town administrator, and we also have Richard Flo, who is our planning and zoning services staff. And part of what we have today is a letter that we've presented to you requesting that, since the town itself is celebrating our 10-year anniversary of incorporation this year, and we have been working very hard over the past 2 years updating our land use plan and looking at various areas that we want to make sure are cohesive in our planning and zoning ordinances and how this town is structured. And as you know, we've got lots of different pockets in the town and the way we were originally incorporated. There's a lot of different areas that we cover. And basically what we want to cover with you today is several different key items, and Mr. Flo is going to do those. But we really want to make sure that you understand that we're trying to do what's best for all of Cabarrus County and looking at the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And that's based on the Article 19 of the General Statutes. And it's stated in your letter that we want to be in accordance and have it granted in accordance with Statute 160A-360E. And we also have a map that Mr. Flo will go over that's labeled Exhibit B that's attached to your letter that shows some critical growth management area. So I'm going to let Mr. Flo go over those items now, and if you have questions during the presentation, then just please let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Richard Flo, and I would like to take just a few moments, and we're going to start by talking a little bit about the existing land use issues in the area. The town, of course, is located approximately 20 miles outside of Charlotte, very, very similar to the Monroe location, the Concord locations, many of the other what we refer to in this area as the ring cities, and most of you have seen the corridors and nodes plans done in the past in the greater Charlotte area. One of the things that's important about this is that that's a critical economic dynamic for location for businesses and other people making decisions about where they're going to reside, where they're going to do business, as you've seen from the growth that's affected our urban area over the past 20 to 30 years. With the improvements made to the Highway 2427 corridor, that previous 5 ring cities surrounding Charlotte is likely to improve to increase to 6 or 7. Highway 16, of course, to the northwest out towards the Denver area is a corridor similar to this, and 2427, the one that we're speaking of today, is a very important corridor. And we're trying to anticipate the change that will occur to the area, to that portion of Cabarrus County. And there are several findings and facts that I'd like to point out that are detailed in your letter today, but the most important item, of course, is our shared jurisdictional boundary. Our corporate limits in the area are essentially meandering the development patterns in the smaller parcels along the 2427 and 601 corridors. We also have, as I pointed out in the letter, the new corridor, the new growth corridor, we also have quite a bit going on adjacent to us with the locust community right next door, with a lot of things that are happening along the 601 corridor. And of course, in moving along fairly quickly, the February 9th of this year, the town council in Midland adopted the first step in annexation, which is resolution consideration. That was not a technical step towards implementation of any particular phase, but it is a step that is establishes sort of an area identified as being under consideration, an area that that would then be under a timetable for study. And, and those are all steps that the community has made to prepare itself for change coming up in the future. That change is driven by a necessity. The necessity that Midland faces has to do with the delivery of future municipal services. At some point, somewhere down the road in the future, the town is going to be faced with increasing demand for municipal services. I've seen this happen in other areas around the greater Charlotte area. Most notably, most people probably recall what occurred in the Huntersville areas, Cornelius areas in the 1990s. That is not beyond reach for our portion of Cabarrus County. I know we don't have a lake there as a catalyst, but I think we have many other attributes that will be a catalyst for growth in our area. I want to ask David to move along to, this is existing land use patterns, but to move along to a series of slides that reflect the build-outs that were recently identified by the North Carolina Department of Commerce Division of Community Assistance. And what you'll see on these maps are essentially representations of densities. These colors, these little spot colors indicate where they were projecting significant growth to occur should, of course, the economy recover and things resume at some reasonable or moderate pace. And David, if you would just go through those 4 build-out plans just so that people can see what was shown in our area. We do hope this year to have some updated background information based upon our first census. With this being the 10th anniversary of the town, we don't have a real census until the 2010 census, and when we receive that information, all of our projections will be updated accordingly by the Division of Community Assistance.
And one key point to point out here, Mr. Flo, sorry to interrupt, but the one that David has up there is the crossroad area. So that is the intersection of Highway 24 and 601. So that is one of those places where we see that potential growth could occur, both residential and commercial potentially at some point. And as we've talked about before, we are looking at ways that we can bring in more commercial growth and keep the tax dollars that we currently have in Cabarrus County instead of a lot of things going outside of our jurisdiction into Stanley County. So that's just one key point I wanted to bring out, Mr. Flo, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. That's a good slide to have up there, David, too, for just a moment, because one of the things about Midland is that it's identified in terms of most people's visual with a few landmarks. You know, we've got the historic community of Midland as well as Cabarrus Station, but many people identify Midland as a signalized traffic intersection along the 24, 27, 601 corridors. And in our efforts in town, we hope to be able to begin the first phase of updates to the land use plan this year with our southeastern quadrant of that particular intersection, showing all of that portion of the town and surrounding areas. What we are going to be faced with as future residential growth, not just interim development, but future residential growth and non-residential development, and hopefully employment centers as well, is to ensure that we have connectivity, that we have logical extension of the capability to extend services in a logical fashion, and that we have a very sustainable and walkable and well-connected community pattern. So we have an opportunity in the area to look at this as almost a clean sheet of paper. It's not quite a clean sheet of paper. Some neighborhoods are established, some businesses are established, but we can work with that very, very well. But many of the areas that fill in those gaps are essentially opportunities for that clean sheet of paper. David, I would like to request that you show our future land use map. Part of the policy adopted in the future land use plan.
Can I ask my next
Ask just a
question?
quick question, because you did mention trying, wanting to maintain the development in Cabarrus County rather than having to go to Stanley. How far is it from the crossroads area of Midland to the area in Locust that is probably going to be their greatest development area?
It's about 5 minutes.
Well,
If that.
miles-wise.
Probably about 3
Yeah.
to 4.
So it's very close.
Very,
Very
very close. And part of the challenge we have is, with us being in the middle of the Highway 24, 27, 601, they can be in Stanley County within a few minutes, and spending tax-based dollars there. And we're friends with them and everything, but it would be nice for us to maintain and have that growth continue to occur in Cabarrus County. And, you know, people also go 10 minutes east to get into Charlotte or Mint Hill. So, I mean, there's a lot of our dynamic within our our taxpayer base that goes to other areas to spend that taxpayer base, you know, taxpayer dollars.
If you could take a look at the map on the screen at this point in time, you'll notice the large rings that go up and down the map. That's along the 601 corridor, and those represent nodes of activity that will emerge over time, whether we plan for them or not. Those that run left to right are following the 2427 corridor. And you can notice just to the right side of the map, the green shaded area and the pink shaded area, that's Locust and Stanfield, right on our flanks. And you may be able to detect, and I apologize for not having a laser pointer with me, but there's the river that follows our eastern side of town as well, which is a very good, logical, physical boundary between the development of services. And if we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves losing locations to those areas on the eastern side of our flank, that Locust community. And if any of you visited Locust lately, they're doing a pretty good job in managing their development patterns and their growth there, and that is our direct competitor in the area. And I think that that we would want to ask you to pull for the Cabarrus team on this.
Why can't we not annex them?
Annex Locust?
Annex Locust? Right.
What is in the blue, why don't you just annex it or ask that be annexed?
Well, in your map, there's a light green that is the current corporate limits. Let's go to the ETJ map, David. And as a matter of fact, let's put the one up that has the resolution consideration boundary on it at the bottom. Let me introduce you to this map. In the center, you'll see two shades of green. The lighter green is the current incorporated area. That's the town limits. The more robust green is the area that we're requesting for your consideration to allow us to extend extraterritorial jurisdiction. The blue, bold blue line that traverses out in the blue areas are the unincorporated portions. That represents the resolution of consideration line. Now, those areas do not qualify as a whole at this time, and may not for quite some time. And part of the challenge with annexation is that you typically have to accept what happens in the area before you can annex it. You can't really annex but so much undeveloped area. There are formulas in the general statutes that spell that out very precisely. And what we're asking of you is to give us the ability to manage the undeveloped but developing areas, and that green area is all within 1 mile, so that's the first threshold in extraterritorial jurisdiction under that provision that the mayor cited in the letter. And that's what we're asking for the ability to manage growth in. That way we can concentrate development in ways that we feel that we can serve in the future, and we can preserve open spaces. Because as you know, the intention to plan is really driven by two things: to preserve things of value or to manage change. And if we didn't care, we wouldn't need to plan.
Well, let me ask you this. You said you're asking for this to manage the undeveloped area.
Mm-hmm.
The undeveloped area does not have a vote to who sits on the council of Midland, correct?
That is correct, and the general statutes have provided for provisions for those positions to be appointed, not to the governing board, but to the other boards and commissions in the town, and we addressed that in our outline to you as the board that naturally, in accordance with the statutes, we would establish those extraterritorial representation points. We've got a bullet on there about representation. It's not something that we can control. I mean, the general statutes spell that out, that those folks would not have a vote on the city council or town council until they began to be annexed themselves. And we do anticipate that all of the areas in the ETJ would ultimately be annexed as they develop or as they meet those definitions of development over the next decade or so.
And one key thing that I also want to point out is that we are going to take the next step. We've defined it in one of our goals for this year, is to do an open land preservation study, so farmland preservation study, to look at those areas that are farmland and how can we preserve those areas to keep them in that state and have that farmland protected over time. So that is something that we are going to look at doing over the next year and start. So that would be something else that we would want to look at within that area of ETJ, is how can we protect those areas as well. Any other questions?
What's the difference? What's the difference between your resolution of consideration and the proposed ETJ?
The green doesn't quite reach out as far as the resolution of consideration. All of these areas are within our zip code. I think it's very important that place have an identity. And we've also taken a look very carefully at school assignments and things of that nature to try to be as minimally disruptive in planning for the future. What we see in our future for the town is a place that identifies as Midland, North Carolina. All the neighborhoods are Midland. They go to schools in the area. They have that same address. I've seen a lot of annexations in the past where people lived in a particular municipal jurisdiction, however their addresses reflected other communities, and it creates a lot of confusion. We've tried to be very cognizant of those things in this layout.
Thank you. Anything else?
Any other questions for us?
Any other questions?
I'm just curious as to why on the right-hand side, where Locust is poking into Cabarrus County, you didn't do more in that area.
We looked at the river as a logical physical
And
boundary
can
for
someone
the.
show the river to us there? On the,
There.
It goes right through there.
No, that's the
No,
county line.
it's
That's the
the,
county line.
it's, it's the line that goes right through there, David. You got your marker on it right there. Mm-hmm.
I'll be happy to point it out to you. It traverses in this area here. You'll see it right there. It continues up. This is the river right here.
So you use that as a physical boundary.
We use it as a physical boundary on the north side. It also is, in some of these areas, it is also a zip code boundary. It's also a number of other things.
And we do have a annexation agreement with Locust as well, outlining some areas that we can't annex and they can't. So we do have that in place as well. That was put in place several years ago.
The ETJ would not necessarily be a limitation on annexation. Should there be a need, or should there be a mutually agreed to a logical annexation with the city of Locust, that it would be something we could still consider. ETJ and annexation don't have any statutory linkage. However, they do make sense from a planning standpoint to take into account the two when you are planning. It's not wise for us to ignore one for the sake of the other. So we've tried to look at all of the influencing factors in the area.
When was the last time an ETJ was granted in Cabarrus County?
Gosh, it's probably been more than 25 years that I'm aware of. And I realize that that's a precedent that's not been addressed by this board in recent history. I would like to urge you to consider this as a change in policy direction. It's very important to the town of Midland. We have a lot of issues that we're faced with down there, and one of the things to pay careful attention to is, if you look at the city limits line, the town limits line of Midland, many projects that we are faced with in the future, whether they're inside our town limits or just outside of our town limits, we're going to have a shared jurisdictional boundary, and I point that out in the little memorandum there. That's very important because those neighborhoods will need to be connected in the future. Those neighborhoods will need to be planned for the extension of things like solid waste collection, police and fire protection, all of the different typical municipal services that a growing area would need, street lighting, and eventually police and other types of protection. And if we have subdivisions that are interconnected but in different jurisdictions, it creates a lot of confusion. And I think many of you probably can think of examples where that has happened in the greater Charlotte area, predominantly in the 90s, in the last decade. But that's very important to us to try to create a uniform sense of place that meets everybody's goals and objectives.
Is this the original town limits?
No, sir. There have been a number of voluntary annexation petitions submitted to the town for various reasons.
I mean, it looks kind of hodgepodge in regards to the,
And that is part of the issue as well. I mean, we've had voluntary annexations, but also when we originally incorporated, it was not a cohesive way to do things, basically. But part of what we want to make sure of is that we are creating an area where we have economic development wanting to come. We're giving a cohesive look of a community, and that we're also addressing all the different issues that we've talked about before.
The boundary of our town limits today is probably twice as long as the boundary of the proposed ETJ. But it doesn't cover nearly the land area, just simply
Right.
from the configuration.
And we have a lot of people in the community that on one side of the street, you know, you're in Midland, on the other side of the street, you're not. So, I mean, it does create that confusion. And we have a lot of different ways we're trying to address it, but this is one that we feel would help us in doing that growth and moving forward, as we've all talked about for southern Cabarrus County. And looking to where we can bring that growth base there, Jay.
okay.
Do you anticipate doing any kind of a land use planning activity such as Harrisburg is currently doing and was done on the eastern side?
We actually have looked at our land use plan for the town limits. We've worked on that for the past 2 years with the Economic Development Group out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina Department of Commerce. And we've actually created a land use for the town limits. Now, having said that, there's a lot of things that are outside of our limits, which we touch up against, which are in the county, that we would like to make sure that what you're wanting to grow there and what we're wanting to grow there are cohesive and we work together. So that's some of the next steps that we want to make sure of, that we look for. And that's one of the reasons we're wanting to do the ETJ. So we can kind of say, okay, how do we want to grow this area? How do we want to make this work? As Richard showed earlier, we had destination centers and economic development centers of destination points that we want to see grow, but we also have neighborhood centers that we want to see grow. So that's part of the whole piece.
I guess my question was aimed at, have the people who live in these areas had the opportunity, the same kind of opportunity that they had in the eastern part
Yes.
and had in Harrisburg, with town meetings and planning and input?
We did. We had several community meetings, and we actually did surveys to them. We got lots of input from them. We did visual surveys. We did the build-out surveys with them. So we had several different community meetings, and there were people that came that were outside of the town limits that came in and gave their input because it's right next door to them, and they wanted to see how it would give their input on how they'd like to see it grow.
Is there any way we can
Get a
have
copy of
any
that to you.
information?
I think we created a CD and sent it to Chairman White. Did you send that yet, David? A CD?
I haven't
We,
got
okay.
anything.
We'll get it to you. We've got the draft removed from it now, for that area, so we'll get that sent over to you. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The landowners that are in the ETJ that you're requesting, are they okay with being subject to y'all's supervision, but not to being able to vote? Have they approved that? Have they said that's fine with us?
There's not been a formal request made of those folks in that area. We would, of course, if the county commissioners gave us the opportunity to go forward, the first things that we would do would be to have public hearings and have an opportunity to present things to them. As the mayor pointed out, a lot of those people were involved in the land use planning exercises in the area, and the actual land use plan covers pretty much that entire area. And back to Commissioner Minot's point, we actually will continue these public processes as part of that, those area plans I mentioned, where we take it to the next level of detail. We'll continuously get further input and feedback from people in that area. So the thing about land use planning, as you well know, is that you're never completely finished. It's a continuing process. But Chairman White, you know, we have not taken a poll. We've not solicited any type of formal input at this time. We felt out of respect it would be appropriate to approach the commissioners, because you have that legislative role in this process.
Right. And I will mention that on our strategic planning committee that worked on this over the past 2 years, we had people that were in the community, but not typically, you know, not all in the town limits. So we had a wide variety of people that participated and came to those meetings and gave input.
Now, where's the gas line go in relationship to the map that we have up here?
We did not put that on this, this particular map.
No.
Any idea, or?
I'm not familiar enough with the layout of the gas line at this time to
Okay.
be able to
I know
lay
it
it on
comes
the
down
line.
the Sand Black Road, then comes across, which is in the town limits, a good portion of it in that area, and then comes back across to Cabarrus Station, and then down Bethel Avenue Extension. I can't point them out specifically on the map because it's very small, but that is the area that I know specifically, because others cut through different parts of properties.
Okay,
That
thank
would
you.
be more on the western side of that area.
Well, I think it's prudent that we have Commissioner Privet and Commissioner Caruth to know what's going on. We want to move this to the 21st. We want to hold it until our July work session, let them look at it and decide how best that everybody would like to do. I just think it's important for them to, I don't think it's fair to them to hear it for the first time on June the 21st.
I agree with you on that one, and it also gives us time to do some more study and maybe
Okay.
have some more questions answered directly from Midland. I know I need to understand the whole concept better than I do today.
If you can get what you presented to us today, and I don't know whatever CD you were talking about getting to me, Mayor Kitts, I can, or get it to us, I can get it out to the rest of the board members. If, you know, we can set this for July, I think that's the 5th, is my gut feeling of when our first July meeting is.
And if we need to.
On July the 5th, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
July 6th. Okay. I'm sorry.
And if we need to sit down with anyone in between, just please let us know and we'll arrange whatever discussions we need to have. Or go over our documents with you, our land use or our maps.
Okay.
Please let us know and we'll be more than happy to do it.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to place this on July the 6th work session? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed? Motion carries to July 6th.
Would you like us to come back on July the 6th to discuss it any further with the group?
Why don't we do this, is once we get the information and disperse it to Commissioners Caruth and Commissioner Privet, as they have questions, we'll gather them and get them to you, Mayor Kitts, or to David. And then from that, we'll get an idea about whether another presentation, because I don't want to take up y'all's time anymore.
What if we need to-
Because if it gets reset for our regular session, July the 19th, then I would assume that y'all would be there for the 19th, so that I didn't want you to,
Right. Well, we can come to any time you need
so,
us.
just to let you know.
Okay, and just let us know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Next matter we have is G2, found on page, actually G2 and G3, but we'll start with G2, is the Cabarrus County Tourism Authority. It's on page 55, and I received a phone call, or I spoke to Mrs. Carpenter yesterday, who said that she would like to be here. However, she has a meeting outside of Cabarrus County, and she will definitely be here at our next meeting if need be. But at this point in time, I will turn it over to Mr. Mills and Mr. Crawford. Mr. Mills is Vice President of the Tourism Authority, and Mr. Crawford is the chairman of the board. Thank y'all.
Good afternoon. We are, of course, here today to deliver our 2010-2011 budget. One of the things that I wanted to do, obviously, is let you know that our CVB board did approve this budget on May 19th at our last meeting. Before we get into the 2010-2011, just to give you a little recap on 2009-10, how that compares. We were actually forecasting our year end to be down 18% over that 2009-2010 budget. And that's primarily due to two reasons. One, the forecasting of the additional properties as we got into last year's budget. Since last April, we've actually added 885 rooms to the county total inventory, which is about 32%. And obviously the economic conditions that we've been seeing. As we've looked at, one of the key hotel indicators is what we call revenue per available room, and it looks at the revenue that's coming in to all the hotels and comparing that to all the hotel rooms that are available. And as we look at the end of December 2009, on the calendar year, that number was down 19.7% compared to 2008. As we look at this first 4 months, very encouraging to tell you that that number is only down 5.8%. So where we were looking at a 19.7 decrease, now we're looking at a decrease 5.8 in the first 4 months. So a couple of very good things happening. We've been outperforming our forecast for the last 3 months. We sit down in January every year. We look at the first 6 months and we forecast out the remainder of the year. And in the last 3 months, we've actually been beating those forecasts in total overall revenue. I can tell you that room demand has actually outperformed the region and the state. The actual Cabarrus County room demand was up 5.4% last year, while the state was down 10.4%, and Mecklenburg County was down 10.7%. And in the first 4 months of this year, our room demand is actually up 19% compared to the state, 6.9%, and Mecklenburg County up 13.8%. So as we look at some of our comp sets and areas in the region, we're actually, again, with the additional inventory, we've dispersed some of that revenue throughout the market, but overall, again, demand is up, and that's a very important indicator for us. As we got into the budget process, we made a decision as an organization, along with the board, that we'd be a little bit more of a research-based organization. We wanted to use any research available to us to help us make key decisions as we went throughout the budget process. We surveyed all the properties, all the hotel properties in the county, and we asked them several different things to try to help us look at our business. But two things in particular, we wanted to get into what were they forecasting, what were their numbers going to look like next year, and what are some of the things that they wanted us to do, what are some of the markets that they wanted us to go after. So those were the two key things that we looked at. On the revenue side, the information that we received back is that the hotels were estimating to be at least 3% up in 2010-11 versus 2009-2010, and that was the basis for the creation of our budget. We still have the 6% occupancy tax, which is 98.5% of our total budget, and 3% increase is what we put in place, along with the additional properties we have in place with new hotels, the Country Inn and Suites and the Hilton Garden Inn, which just opened up. All the revenue sources that we use as far as our cooperative advertising interest that we have on our accounts, we budgeted flat over this current year. There is a chart that's in your information there, and it gives you a little bit of a history as we go through the last 3 or 4 years with the Bureau. I can tell you in 2007, 2008, we were at $2.1 million, and of course next year our budget is at $3.3 million. So you can see the growth. It's that chart. As we go from left to right, you can see how the growth that we've seen, and obviously a lot of it has to do with the amount of inventory we have. A lot of good things I think that we're seeing also going along with the Bureau. Along on the bottom, you see two pie charts. The one on the far left shows you a bar chart of just, again, that revenue increase. And as you go through the middle, there's actually our budget allocation. So once we get our revenue in place, we need to take a look and determine how we want to allocate all those expenditures, from salary and wage to administration operations to marketing. The one in the middle there is how we've budgeted this year, and then the one on the right is a typical industry standard budget allocation. So we have more of our dollars, we're allocating them to the marketing side. One of the things that assists us from administration standpoint is our overhead. Compared to other bureaus that have larger visitor centers that they have to manage and maintain, which we do not. So we're able to take some of those dollars and put them into the marketing side of our budget. So that's kind of a year-over-year analysis. Going through those three categories, salaries, looking at last year into this year, we did do a restructure at the end of August last year, and we eliminated 6 positions, and then we spent the second half of that year redefining those positions and restaffing back up. We left a couple of those positions still open as we were looking at the economy and how we were trending in the first half of this year. So we held a couple positions open and did not refill those positions. And again, we do have those in place for the 2010-2011 budget. We also are looking at adding a visitor services manager on top of that open position and some additional part-time associates. One of the things that we're wanting to do is obviously get out to our visitor more. Most of you are aware we have an office at Dale Earnhardt Boulevard where our visitor center is, but to go and meet the visitor and to help them with their needs, we are going to work with Concord Mills and work with Charlotte Motor Speedway. I can tell you that during the past race weeks, we actually manned an information booth by the ticket counter at Charlotte Motor Speedway for 2 weeks and assisted people with destination information, assisting them with booking hotels, where to go to eat, and places and things to do when they're in the area. We're going to continue that along with Concord Mills, again with these part-time folks that we're going to put out at these destinations. And key events, if there's a large event that's going on, we want to make sure we're manning booths and we have people there represented, obviously, to help that visitor improve their overall experience by giving them as much information as we can. On the administration side of the budget, it's actually a little bit less than last year. We did spend this year upgrading some of our computer equipment. We were sharing a server with the chamber. So we did get our own server this year and upgraded our computer equipment to be able to have better communication, overall effectiveness. And then we take what's left from those fixed costs and we get into the marketing side of our budget. On the marketing side, we first look at things that are allocated, things that are in place, such as our 10% for our sports development, which was started last year. At the end of this year, we will have $310,000 in that account. And obviously that is in place to continue to grow and look at the overall needs within the county from a youth amateur sports facility standpoint. We have an independent consultant that's going to be in June who's been looking at our current facilities and is going to give us some recommendations that our board and committees within the board can take a look at and determine how to best utilize that expense that we've been allocating. We also have at the $100,000 to the Cabarrus Arena, which we've had in place for the last 6 years, is ongoing. Once we get out of those allocations with what's remaining, that kind of ties back into the second part of our surveys, which is ask the hotels exactly what it is that they're looking from the Bureau. This was really good information, in particular as you have certain markets called the association market. Many of you might belong to certain associations within your business, which is where we were heavily weighted. After taking this survey and talking to our hotels and meeting with them on a regular basis, we determined that the hotels are comfortable with that market. And one of the things that they wanted us to focus more on was the corporate market. So we were able to take that information from that survey, apply it to our budget, and see the impact of it as we go throughout the next year. Obviously, we made a change with our visitor services, which is a brand new department for us for next year. We're going to make sure we have individual people in place, obviously, to service the visitors and the group meetings that are coming to town. We will be present if there's a large convention or meeting in town with different response. We might assist them through transportation. And again, things that we can do to go to the meeting planners that are trying to decide where they want to go. We're trying to take everything we can to those meeting planners and say, here's what we can do to help you. If transportation is an issue, if you need help getting to the Cabarrus Arena, if that's where your event is and you're staying out at exit 49 or exit 60, that's where we can kind of step in and assist. So those are the things that we will be doing through the visitor services area. I do want to say that the Bureau did adopt, the board adopted a mission statement for the Bureau in its board retreat this past year, which was to drive visitation to Cabarrus County to generate the maximum impact through hotel stays and visitor spending. So obviously, we are funded by the occupancy tax, which is 98% of our budget. But it's through the destination and having people come in and have their entire total economic spend that we're trying to drive, because as we do a better job with that, it will obviously reduce the overall burden to the taxpayers of the county by being able to bring in additional sales tax revenues as we go forward. So, and that is it.
Are there any questions for Mr. Mills at this time?
I'd just like a little more information. You continually mention surveys, which I agree are extremely important. Who do you target, and how do you reach out? I mean, do you work through the chamber sending out mass surveys, or do you just concentrate on certain areas, or how do you get who's involved in those surveys?
This was all hotels, this first round that we did back in January. So we have an independent tourism consultant that created the survey, does it with bureaus all over the country. He's based out of Charlotte, and he sent this information to the hotels. Some other things that we wanted to get into is trying to determine the types of business that we're seeing. We understand that we're a leisure destination primarily. One of the biggest reasons that people come to visit us is because they're visiting friends and families. So as we target the things that we do in our marketing efforts, that's critical for us to know. So where do we go and how do we get that information out? One of the things that I put by your stations is our new destination guide. And I think it's a critical piece. I think everybody should have this. We changed the name of it. It used to be called a visitor's guide. Everybody should have this on their coffee table at home, because you have family, you have friends that come by and visit. And there's a lot of information on the county in here that can impact, again, that economic impact from a leisure standpoint. Where are the hotels seeing their customer come from? What kind of drive markets? Atlanta, Greensboro. So how do we maybe make advertising decisions? So they just kind of wanted to find out what kind of business are you seeing? Leisure business, meeting business, sports business. Where are those people coming from? We are now taking it a step further. We did an economic impact survey study at the National Hot Rod Association event in the ZMAX in March. We are also surveying just leisure travelers. We'll have folks that will be in the hotels during breakfast time, and they'll just, where'd you come from? How long are you staying? What are you doing while you're here? And we can use that data, again, to assist us. We're doing that with conventions. We survey folks that are attending conventions. How long are you staying? Where are you going? What do you do when you're here? What kind of money? How much money are you spending? So we can truly see through research what our economic impact is. Good.
All right, so is your mission, does your mission not include people who live in the area and don't necessarily want to come and spend the night in a motel, but they may be coming from, a driving distance to Cabarrus County? That is not part of what the Visitors Bureau is involved in, or?
No, I think it is.
And so how do you touch those people?
The piece that really is working, excuse me, allergies, but right now, like in my hotel, for example, there'll be somebody in there tomorrow morning actually questioning, or not questioning, but actually doing survey on my customer base at breakfast. Some of those folks are in a drive market for us. I mean, I think frankly, a lot of what we get in Cabarrus County, particularly at our hotel, we're a good indicator because of the convention business. Most of it is drive, coming in from a 3-state area type thing within a 3-4 hour drive time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but a lot of it is outside the boundaries of Cabarrus County, but a lot of folks driving in, staying in hotels in Cabarrus County. And we're doing this in other
Right.
hotels,
And
not
I
just
think
the
that's
embassy.
fine, but I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if there's not a whole segment of people that aren't getting touched. And the reason I asked that, I attended the antique show at the arena one day, and just on my own, did my own little informal survey of the vendors at that, because it was the first or second time they'd had it there, and asked them how they liked the facility, what were the problems they had, blah, 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 blah. One of the ones I heard over and over was people can't find the arena. People who are driving in from outside the county can't find the arena. There's no, once they're off the interstate, I don't even know if the interstate has any directions, but
It does.
once they're off there, they're lost. And that was the type of thing, that's why I'm asking. how are you touching the people that are driving in here, because they're spending money as well?
Sure.
Well, I think one opportunity would be to catch an arena event, which would be like a hotel event, and do the same thing, just kind of like what you did. Possibly doing
One thing, Commissioner Minot, that I thought that at our last board meeting was discussed is that there is one person is out at Concord Mills talking to people that come to Concord Mills that may not be staying in the area. So that is
True.
one location that I thought that
Correct.
was discussed, that somebody is out there trying to do an informal survey and discuss their experience, how they find out about it. And it's twofold, is not only how they like their experience, but is there ways that we can better guide you to meals or stays or other attractions here in the county? Not just staying at Concord Mills, but there's other
Right.
things.
Is there a connection with Kannapolis and Concord, downtown merchants and so forth? Do you have those connections that try to pull people to those areas as well?
I think that is in some of our surveys and trying to find out exactly, where people are going and what they're doing, so we can get that information. On the arena side, and this is our chance to plug an event, we were able to secure the USA Men's Volleyball Olympic gold medal team from Beijing. They will actually be at the Cabarrus Arena, not this weekend, but next, on Friday and Saturday evenings, competing against Team Egypt. And we actually have already secured our surveys, so we'll have somebody there surveying at the arena and finding out, again, about information about the arena and
I
what people
guess
saw.
maybe I'm not making myself clear.
I think
I'm very interested in strengthening our local businesses that already exist here. We have a wonderful little downtown Concord. Kannapolis needs, as they develop, they're going to need to be able to have a way to promote their downtown businesses. Concord Mills is pretty well known, and I'm sure going to Concord Mills and talking to those people, you can find out how they knew about Concord Mills. But is there a link, or do you plan to have a link with the people of those other areas to help pull people to them too? Because,
Well, I think.
they're important as well.
One of the things, Commissioner Minor, one of the things that the Bureau's doing is, and I think Jay just touched on it, is there'll be a more concerted effort like at Concord Mills than there has been in the past to provide visitor services, which is, I think, if somebody's coming in to talk about other things to do in Cabarrus County besides staying in hotels, in other words, restaurants. Downtown Concord is an obvious, and Kannapolis for that matter. There's also going to be that same service at the track at Charlotte Motor Speedway, just a brand-new scenario. But it's where the brochures, where the maps, where the one-on-one conversations take place to talk about those things you're talking about, particularly, Kannapolis and Concord and so forth, and other restaurants and other businesses. Besides, I think what I'm hearing you say is folks coming here are already here for a purpose if they're staying in hotels.
Right.
And they're either here because of leisure or a family event or a convention or something. Then you got the other group coming in that's not utilizing those services that needs to understand what to do here, and that's what these two ancillary offices are going to do. We also have in all the hotels, every hotel has a blank channel, which is not blank anymore, but it's a video that talks about the county and what to do in addition to everything, which helps that outside the hotels, people that are here. Gives a little bit of diversity to get around and do other things besides, stay in hotel rooms, eat in other restaurants, that kind of thing. So it's heading in that direction, definitely, and I think we're getting better at it every year. So Donna's got a good program going on.
And we have a lady that's in the office that's in charge of partnership, and she meets with the local partners every other month with folks from the Concord Downtown Development. We'll come by Merchants Association, local businesses, and in that meeting, we talk about things that we're doing. We seek input from them. So when we're out meeting with visitors, we can communicate on what's new, what's happening, and as we're working with meeting planners, if there's something in particular, maybe they can get involved, whether it's a restaurant that might be able to assist us with hosting a group, or some people that are maybe doing a FAMSA, where we do familiarization tours, so people before they actually book their meeting will come here in advance, and we'll work with those local partners and try to bring them into the fold on that.
The latest CD that went out, or the latest commercial went out addressing the race fans, was also bringing them into Reed Gold Mine,
Right. Right.
Rocky River Vineyards, and downtown Concord. I mean, then that's what they were pulling. You're here here's what else you can do when you, or here's what you can do when you come back to Cabarrus County.
Right.
Yeah, I think as we grow, we're going to get much better at that.
And the new Davis Theater
Exactly.
productions
Correct.
and things of that
Exactly.
nature.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Crawford or Mr. Mills? We have a motion to place, do you want to place this under the consent agenda, or do you want to place it under new business? Motion to place it on the consent agenda. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, motion carries. Thank you all. The next involves you as well, is Senate Bill 1357. This is an expansion or request for expansion of the Cabarrus County Tourism Authority, and this is, I briefly mentioned it to everybody at our last meeting concerning the expansion. The bill is attached that would expand the board to from 9 to 12, and would provide nominations from 3 from the from the chamber, 3 from the Board of Commissioners, and 6 from the Tourism Board, with 1 nomination for each seat instead of 3 nominations per each seat. Is there anything else, Mr. Day?
Well, I just included it in here because of the other change, which removed the requirement of providing 3 names, 3 nominees for each seat when it comes to the Board of Commissioners. I think when you were given the information about the changes, that was not included in it. So obviously that has an impact on you as the appointing authority. The other, whenever something's due or comes up for a change, then you kind of wonder, well, are there other things that ought to be changed as well? One other thing for consideration is, obviously there's a direct correlation between the Board of Commissioners, which is the funding authority, making appointments, and the CVB, which is doing the work, making the appointments. Over time, it's changed with the Chamber of Commerce. At one time, each of the 2 existing chambers of commerce had nominations, and then that was consolidated into one. Of course, one of the questions I think that's raised now is, does it even make sense for that still to be in there? Maybe it does, but the Chamber of Commerce is a private membership organization that doesn't really have a direct contribution to the Visitors Authority in terms of the funding that's raised and the operation. So in considering any changes, certainly one option you have is, well, maybe the appointments just ought to be spread between the CVB and the county commissioners, or you might want to expand it for other things, but it just seemed a relevant issue.
I'll let Mr. Crawford or Mr. Mills talk about that, but I know that when in our board meetings, the importance of expanding, or thought was of expansion, was because of the number of different attractions, providers, not just hotels, that there needed to be more voices on the board. It was my opinion that the Concord Mills needed to be able to play a part in it, because that they're an attraction. A lot of different restaurateurs, whether it's and if they have the time, they need to have a voice, whether it's restaurants on 49 versus the other exits, not 49, exit 49 versus other exits, different attractions that we have. So that was what, one thing that I was in favor of the expansion, is to get that, get some additional voices that we otherwise may not hear from. And we had, anyway, so that was what my thought was, is that if it was going to expand, that was a main reason, because of the activities within Cabarrus County have expanded and grown over the past several years, and I thought that needed to be addressed. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Crawford and
Mr.
Mr.
White,
Mills.
that's well stated. In fact, I think the original idea was just to broaden the diversity anyway, of the representation of tourism in the county. Another key reason too is to just broaden our base to be able to do committee work. It gives us the opportunity to get a little more, what I call board talent anyway, on, that has a lot of input and direction for Donna and John and the staff, I think, and where we're going, in relating to marketing particularly. and then relating to that diverse representation, i.e. that Commissioner White talked about with Mills, for example. But other than that, I think the objective was just to get those things accomplished. I've been on the board now for going on 3+ years and served as chairman now for 2 of those. And what I've always seen is that original, I call it the triumvirate, that represents the way the board's made up, that the Board of Commissioners really represents the governmental voice for the board. Also, you all are the funding mechanism, as Mr. Day said. That the CVB, per Mr. Day too, said it really carries it out, but it also represents the tourism side. We go through Donna and team to voice what we do. And then on the, I think, just general business and the makeup of the community, in Cabarrus County, the chamber obviously that is the voice, I think, for just business in general, the mechanism to belong to in order to have yourself heard, whether you're a dry cleaner or whether you're an Embassy Suites Convention Center. It really doesn't make any difference. And so I've always looked at it as that. So, I've not had any, personally not had any issues about how that diversity is made up or how that's taken, that board is made up of that triumphant organization. So, but that's just my opinion on that.
One other possibility that you have that I should have mentioned, particularly in light of what the chairman was saying, is there are some cases where board seats are specified to certain, to represent certain types of businesses. So if you wanted to have some certainty, let's say the restaurant business was represented or retail, then you can specify that. Now, these bills are currently going through the process right now, which means they may be amended. So if you wanted to have some sorts of requirements in there to ensure that regardless of what happens in the future, if none of the people here are involved in it anymore, that there remains that sort of representation for retail and restaurateurs, then you certainly have that opportunity to request it.
If I may address that, we went, as Mr. Day said, it is in legislature right now. We elected to be able to, or at least right now anyway, without having any of that in place, just to manage that at the board level. If everything were to pass, that we would, I guess, diversify at that point, making sure, and the board represented by your representative and everybody else's out of that triumvirate would be responsible and accountable for making sure that diversity is there, that we got a broader spectrum. It can be specified though, which but it's
that
not
was
right now.
discussed heavily, and there's pros and cons on each side. And what came out that I remember it came out, and Mr. Downs may correct me, and certainly Mr. Crawford and Mr. Mills. But if we talk about a restaurateur, do we keep it as broad as a restaurateur, or do we say a large restaurateur? Was it executive, or there was different levels of restaurants. Attractions is what sort of, so that yes, we can, and we did debate on if we did that or not, and the concern was if there's benefits to both sides, so that it's just a preference of, and the board came down on that, if what's the best way. And then there was also discussion is it'd be great to have somebody from fast food, a general manager from a fast food restaurant, but would they have the time and the commitment to meet? And if we set it had to be a fast food and we couldn't find somebody, what do we do with that seat? That's so there's pros and cons.
I would think leaving it at the board level to make those decisions, but I don't know if you have policies or whatever, having it stated in there that you want this balance and maybe mention the different areas. And again, I will come in here and say I'd like to see make sure there's a balance between locally owned businesses and larger businesses that are chain type businesses.
Well, I think to your comment, if we leave it at the board level, I think everybody's represented. That board, the Board of Commissioners, the Chamber, and the CVB, and like any board, we would have a talent pool, obviously, and to pick from. And I think the makeup of any board in our type of organization, the talent is what's important, and somebody that's going to commit to it. And it's always a challenge to get everybody to show up for every meeting, but that's when the business is done, and that's when the board of the business communicates with the team. And I think what we're shooting for is the best talent in the county, is That's what we're looking for.
I also came down on the idea that if it was not specified, the Board of Commissioners ends up approving or not approving any board member that's nominated.
Sure.
So that if the CVB or the Tourism Board decides to nominate all managers from Arby's, the Board of Commissioners can say no. You know, so that we have the ultimate authority to say yes or no in the makeup of that board, and also the financing.
Well, the only caveat there is that now the requirement for 3 different people for a particular seat has been removed, and the language says that the Board of Commissioners shall appoint from a list presented by these groups. So if they give you a list of one person, then you shall appoint that one, and that's what the legislation says.
Well, then we can address that in either one way, either two ways. Is we either take out the shall and put in may, or go back to 3 with a recommendation that the strong recommendations that the number 1 on the list is who's the recommendation, who the tourism board
Right.
highly recommends.
Well, and there's
But-
another way of looking at it too. Again, each group is represented on that board, and our board or that board seats to nominate the folks that are going to be presented to the BOC. So you would have representation from the perspective of this commission on that board before that name's even brought to this meeting. So another way to look at it anyway. And I think at the end of the day, it goes down to the judgment and trust of the current board or the future boards for the CVB as it goes forward to do that. So another way of looking at it.
Any other questions or?
I'm trying to figure out the part of the, Mr. Day's comment about the chamber appointing the 3 seats.
Okay.
Did y'all talk about that?
Sure. Oh, no, we did not. I don't remember that coming up in our discussions, in the board level discussions.
We're putting this just on the agenda to say that we support the,
No,
Senate
well, it's
bill,
only
or
for
what are
us
we
to
trying to
review
do?
to understand. Anytime local legislation is introduced, we should look at it and understand how it may or may not affect the Board of Commissioners. And it's put on because it certainly does affect us as to how the makeup is of the Tourism Authority, of the board, and also the expansion. So at this point in time, we can either say that we can put it on for the 21st for further discussion to support, reject, ask that it be withdrawn, or ask that it be modified. I think it's a 3: support, reject, or ask for it to be modified. And if it is going to be modified, it needs to be done quickly, because who knows how long the legislature is going to be in session.
That might even be too late. The 21st. Could be.
Could be.
Yeah, it's moving pretty
So
quick.
do you need a motion to put it on new business?
Well, this is moving pretty quick through the legislature. So I'd suggest if you wanted to suggest any changes to the delegation, that it would be worth discussing tonight, because it's going that quickly.
Well, if it's a matter of urgency, I'm supportive of it as the way it's written. I certainly would not support removing the Chamber of Commerce, if that was the thrust of your comments. That's only 3 out of, that's 25% of the seats, and certainly if the chamber isn't representative of business, I don't know. I mean, I missed my mark, but I wouldn't want them to be in control of a majority of those choices, I would object to that. As for the word shall, that does not remove the fact that if these are presented to us and none of those that on the list are satisfactory, does the commission still have the right to reject all? Or does shall say you must?
Well, the shall.
I'm not a lawyer.
I would certainly think that you would, well, excuse me. I'll let our attorney earn his keep.
Shall typically is a mandatory provision that you would, that if the bill or the local law says shall, that it's mandatory that you follow that. In fact, there was a recent case in which the Supreme Court ruled that should also is mandatory. And I never thought that was the case. So I think that there's not much question that if it says shall, that you have to follow the prescription.
In that case, I would suggest that we have that word, ask that word be changed to may. 'Cause I can see where that could possibly cause an issue. That could be very contentious and divisive.
The chairman was just pointing out that you probably also wanted to say 3 unduplicated names. 3 unduplicated names.
Well, then you can go back to say a list of at least 3 persons.
Individuals.
I mean, instead of striking at least 3, just,
I think the best thing is if there's any concern, I think it should just go back to at least 3.
I mean,
Because
yeah.
the whole point I see is the county or the Board of Commissioners would be appointing 3 people. If at least one of those 3 people are not voicing the concerns of whoever the nominated person or persons are, then they're not doing their job as a liaison. So that, and one of them has to be a commissioner. So that if that commissioner is not voicing a concern for, any one of the names, then something's wrong. There always will be always an exception to the rule, but I certainly think that at that process of that board, as a person's named, they should be able to say, that's a concern for me and it needs to be raised, and then that can be brought up to the commissioners in the meeting, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, because these nominees, or I guess appointed, not nominated, I guess they are nominated and appointed, but they're voted on by the majority of our board, or the CVB's board. So before they come to the Board of Commissioners, they've been given the high sign, so to speak. But if it weren't by majority, or by consensus, then you may have an individual, and I think it might make sense that individual have the right to say something about, why they abstained or why they did not vote for that individual. But generally, before it comes before this commission, those individuals would have been scrutinized, and we wouldn't present anybody. I don't think that we would not have the representation because of the makeup of the board. It wouldn't have the representation of all the entities in mind.
Do you have any additional comments, Commissioner Poole?
I would just unstrike the word at least 3 persons. Are you reading it to say that, for example, seat 2 have to be 3 names submitted for seat 2?
What happens is every year, like the first, say year 1, seat 1, 2, and 3 are up. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then so that in seat 1, the Board of Commissioners would nominate would be either as it's listed. And in seat 2, the Tourism Authority would submit 3 names to fill that seat, and we would.
But, your earlier comment was that you couldn't have the same person's name submitted for more than 1 seat. But I think that's what that means by at least 3. I don't read that to say that seat 1 has to have 3 names and we pick one of the 3. It's just saying of seats 1, 4, and 7, you have to have 3 names, or 2, 5, and 8. you have to have 3 names. Is that not how it's written? I mean,
Each of those seats is appointed in different years.
Right.
So the way it ends up working is it's 3 names for each seat when it comes available or when it's due for appointment. So initially, it would have been, 9, or, 3 for each of the 3.
okay. I don't, that's not the way that I read. I understand what you're saying because of them hitting in different years.
I see.
But I don't think the way that it's actually written means
I
that
see what
there's
you're
3
saying.
people for each of the seats. It just says, that was your point of a different person has to be, you can't put the same person's name up 3 times.
I see what you're saying.
So I'm not certain.
The other question, I guess, or issue I should have raised for you to address, or to at least hear an answer to a question, is in adding the 3 seats, rather than allocating 1 seat to each of the 3 groups represented, they were all given to the Tourism Authority. And I'm kind of curious about why that was done.
Well, actually, really to provide more diversification towards tourism, just, that we wanted the 3 seats representing either, like Commissioner White said, either tourism destinations like mills, restaurants, and we don't have the ability to really, that has not been the case in the past. And having that additional help, I guess, talent, if you will, on the board is going to be a real benefactor, I think, to help guiding this team, having that voice.
So
That
you-
is if, the thought is, if the 3 entities, the county, the tourism authority, and the chamber aren't getting along, and say the chamber, one of the 3 wanted to sabotage the tourism authority, they could put 3 non-tourism people on the board, or, in successive years, and kind of slog it down, and is one way to do it. I don't think that would ever happen, but again,
Well, I think that carries forward to going back to the at least 3 persons name, because then there is some measure of control for the commission if they have a choice of 3 names, rather than just getting 1 name and having to either, well, be mandated to do it because of the word shall.
any other discussion to remove?
If they nominated Attila the Hun under this wording,
Mike's already on there.
and you were limited to one name, then you've got to take good old Attila.
We have a motion to strike at least under subparagraph A2 and subparagraph A3.
So move.
Now, is there any
It doesn't
other?
address it for
To
4.
strike at least 3, to unstrike at
I want
least
to do
3.
that in a second.
Okay.
You know
Okay.
what we mean.
Strike, so it says at least 3. We have a motion, we have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second to request the striking of at least 3 under subparagraphs A2 and A3. There was some discussion concerning A3 regarding whether the chamber should have submitting any names, and there was also some discussion about subparagraph A4 about the remaining 3 seats being appointed by the Cabarrus County Tourism Authority.
Section 4, I would add the words at least 3,
Okay.
because that's not in there.
Okay. Would you want to strike that paragraph completely and just divide it, or request that it be divided equally, or keep it as is with the addition of at least 3 for each
I think
seat?
I understand the reasoning for it to be the tourism authority, so I don't have a problem with that.
Is there anything else about the paragraph 3, striking the chamber, or keep it as is?
I'm fine to leave the chamber.
Okay. So do we have a motion to add in the appropriate place at least 3 under subsection A4, requesting that to be added from a list of at least 3 persons?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Anything else? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Next matter we have is G4, is the CDBG scatter site rehabilitation public hearing for a closeout grant. Mrs. Sifford, thank you.
Good afternoon. What you have before you is the public hearing that's required at the end of the grant. We did complete 7 full rehabs and 6 urgent repairs at an average cost of $44,521. I don't have the exact amounts finalized. I'm still processing a few small bills, but I will have that for you at your meeting. But will be around $373,000. Are there any questions?
Any questions? We have a motion to place this under new business to hold a public hearing.
New,
We have a motion, we have a second. All in
Second.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Thank you. G5 is the amendment to the construction standards fee schedule, page 72. Mr. Marshall and Mr. DeVoe.
For those of you who've not met him, this is Scott DeVoe, who's our Chief Building Inspector. This amendment that we're proposing is not for additional revenue. It's really just for clarification. We've had some questions, particularly on, not on new construction, but on rehab construction in particular, about some of these fee schedules and which part of the fee schedule applies, and the clarification is intended to correct that.
Any questions? Has this been discussed with the development community or developers, or who it applies to?
Only in the sense that we've had them complaining to us about which one it is. And we offered that we would make a correction to clear that up.
With these corrections, would that clear that up or create more, more complaints?
They
Or a
may
little
not-
both?
I'm not saying they'll always like the fees, but it will clear it up.
Okay. If we have no other questions, do we have a motion to place this under the consent agenda?
second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, motion carries.
Thank you.
Next is G6, which is a reservation of capacity for the Forest Park Crossing Apartment Project, page 78.
Good evening. This is a reservation of capacity certificate for the Forest Park Crossing Apartment Project. This project has 56 units, and it is located in the city of Kannapolis. They're requesting their reservation of capacity. When staff did the calculations, the capacity is inadequate, so they would be required to pay the voluntary mitigation payment and be subject to a phasing schedule. The applicant, however, has proposed a different phasing schedule and would like to change the timing and pay for everything up front because this is an apartment complex project. So they would like to go ahead and prepay up front to be able to pull all of their permits as early as fall of this year. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, and we'd like for this to be placed on new business.
Do we have any questions for Mrs. Morris at this time?
There was a development somewhere, I thought it was around Forest Park, that the city of Kannapolis was in opposition to. Is that this one?
This is that same development, I believe. There is a representative here if you would like for her to answer any questions you have about.
I just remember reading it, saw it in the paper, and
Yes, I
that
believe
there was
it-
opposition to it, so I didn't know what,
I believe it had something to do with financing, or they were requesting.
You can, why don't you
I
come
don't
up
know,
and
I
introduce
just wanted
yourself?
clarification since that had been previously.
Yeah, this is Ms.
Reported.
Foley.
Hi, we represent the developer on this project, and it's an affordable housing, low-income housing financed tax credit project. So it does have some federal financing, and it's, restricted to low-income tenants. So with any of these projects, there is sometimes opposition. But we have, we've received all of our approvals and financing consents, and are just asking for permission to go ahead and pay the whole fee up front so that we can pull all the permits at the same time.
I thought it was an opposition, was it an opposition to the project or an opposition to not giving any money to the project?
I'm not familiar with what opposition you're referencing.
I read something in the paper.
There was something in the paper, I don't know,
Okay.
ask the reporters if they know what they covered. I just remember reading in the paper about the mayor was in opposition of a project close to the elementary school, and this is close to it. So I was just trying to connect dots. I wasn't certain.
Does it, it's
what their
within the
opposition
zoning?
was.
This project is, it's my understanding that they do have the appropriate zoning, to move forward. Do you have,
We're not asking, we don't have any other requests for, zoning or funding or anything. Everything is set. We just, it actually cannot do the phasing the way the financing is set up. We have certain deadlines, for the federal funding deadlines. It's got to be, so many funds have to be spent by certain deadlines, and the whole project has to be placed in service by a certain deadline. And so the phasing structure just actually doesn't work with the financing.
right, and then I believe what the newspaper said was that that Kannapolis denied, a loan. So they were asking for a loan
Okay.
from the city. So that would be independent of this reservation of capacity. So this is just specifically for the project, and it sounds like the financing is worked out, but this is just strictly for the reservation of capacity, for the school students. And you can see the, number one provides the phasing schedule that the ordinance, dictates, and then, you can see the second part is where they are proposing to pay everything ahead of time, in order to be able to pull those 56 permits. And the one question that you all normally ask is about the buildings. So there are 3 16-unit buildings and then 1 8-unit building. So you can see that doesn't really fit within that phasing schedule.
Any other questions?
So at what point do you expect all of the units to be built and occupied? I mean, you've said when you want to, that instead of doing the phasing, you want to be able to pull the permits.
Right, they would be built, I don't know the exact construction timeline. I think it's probably towards the end of 2012.
Okay, so they would be, like, you would build one of the 16-unit buildings and occupy it, and then start building the next one, and,
No, the plan is just to build it as one complex, and that is the way that the financing is done. All of our, mortgages would be on the project as a whole.
Mhm.
So we actually have to do it that way.
okay, so you'll build everything, and then
correct.
somewhere by the end of 2012, end of next
Yeah,
year,
or when that.
2 years out,
Whenever that. when
is
their
where you
construction
presume that it
deadlines.
will start being occupied.
Correct, and it would lease up uniform throughout all the buildings.
Looking at the numbers on your chart, it doesn't look like, is it next to Forest Park Elementary? It doesn't look like, it's going to add that many youngsters to Forest Park. 8? Or no, excuse me, no. Yeah, 8, just 8 children.
Is that correct, Mrs. Morris?
Right, overall, the calculation based on our current student generation rates is that there would be 8 elementary students, 3 middle school, and then 4 high school students, for a total of 15 from the complex, because it is a smaller complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those
And we're
8
definitely
children
not,
could
we're-
conceivably be in the first building built if we insisted on the first.
On the-
Initial schedule. Well, I don't know that changing the schedule's gonna make that much difference.
Is it, do you want to put this on new
It would ju-
business?
Yeah, it's got to be new business. but-
Yeah.
Or, excuse me, it doesn't have to be new business.
Well, I would
Big-
make a motion to put it on new business. And I would also ask if you can, staff could verify with the mayor and Kannapolis and them, and just kind of clear up what their concerns were. I'd just like to know that. I just guess for general information, and you can just send that to us. It doesn't have to be at the meeting in 2 weeks, but I can't remember the reasons behind it, so. But I would say new business primarily because we have 2 commissioners not here, and one of which will definitely be asking some questions.
We have a motion, do we have a second? All in favor say aye. All opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next matter we have is G7, which is Department of Social Services approval of amendment to local workforce plan. This is found on page 86 of our agenda. Mr. Rose.
Yes. Good afternoon. As you're aware, the department administers the Work First program, which is a temporary assistance program to families. We provide workforce development and job training to these families. We operate this program under the umbrella of the state, but we do develop a local plan. That we do that in conjunction with our partners, and this plan is submitted to you for approval, usually every 2 years. We have, as part of this plan, been working under what's called a 6-month exemption. The state allows exemptions for clients that have children under 1 year of age. And this is primarily targeted at clients really that have newborn babies. And basically what happens is when a child is born, the client has up to a 6-month exemption from the mandatory participation regulations that come with Work First. We are proposing to extend that 6 months to 1 year, which is allowable under the state policy. Based on the needs that we're seeing with our clients right now, we're at that hard-to-serve population. We feel like a year exemption would help us better prepare those clients to meet the needs of the program when they start to become active participants. In addition to that, we've seen a reduction in our child care funds, as you know, for next year. So this will allow us to stretch our child care dollars a little better, because once we start to serve them, we have to provide them the child care and all the supportive services. So it will allow us to extend those dollars a little bit further by adding an additional 6 months. And then, of course, it will help us in our participation rate as well, too, since we're having clients that are really have more challenges and more needs. It allows us to develop more resources for them. So we're asking for this this change. This has been recommended and agreed to by our state consultant, as well as the Social Service Board has agreed it would be a good change, but of course it requires your final approval.
Any questions for Mr. Rose at this time?
The only question I had was, it says, although formal action was not taken by the board, there was no opposition to the amendment. Is formal action required or should have been taken by your board, or?
No, you're the actual authority on this. They didn't actually take formal action because at the time we didn't have a quorum when they heard it, but they just made a motion or made a basic collective supporting of it. But no, there's no formal action required by the board on this. You're the actual authority for this.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion to place this on the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
G8 is Parks approval of purchase of real property. Page 90 in our agenda.
Included in with the agenda request, it's a grant application, the letter from CTT about the Clean Water Management Trust Fund grant, and a budget amendment. It's a very lengthy application, so I wanted to see if you all had any questions about that specifically. Travis Moorhead is with Caroline Fred Trail and is very familiar with that grant, and he has changed the grant to say Cabarrus County, so he was telling me, instead of Mount Pleasant, because Mount Pleasant is who originally applied for the grant. He can tell you more about the grant and the process of the money that has been awarded. But I just wanted a basic summary: 47.9 acres in Mount Pleasant, right next to, or one lot away from Oldenburg, right on the Carolina Thread Trail, 5,415 feet of thread trail. So it was a wonderful location. It would be the first thread trail property purchased outside of any city limit in Cabarrus County. We had this opportunity just kind of come about, so we did not have money budgeted for it. Mount Pleasant did have the original, Adrian Cox actually talked with the landowners when he was going through looking at their greenway paths and corridors, and possibly trying to find someone who was willing to sell or donate or give, and he found this land. And then it worked out that Mount Pleasant wasn't able to take advantage of it. Travis called and said, let's look at this. So we met with Mr. Downs, and $282,000 piece of property for $10,000 that it would cost the county for the 47.9 acres. We thought that was a pretty good deal. So if you have any questions, or Travis, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Any questions?
So the county's just is paying the closing costs? Because the
Correct.
grant's gonna cover the actual cost of the property?
Correct. It was $282,000. The landowner would sell it for 50%. The grant is for $141,000, which covers the total cost.
Does the landowner get a benefit for selling it?
Yes, they do.
Tax benefit or
Yes, they do.
something? Okay. You want this on new business or?
We can put it under consent agenda.
Consent. I'd make a motion. Do we have the funds, I presume,
Yes.
for the $10,000?
Yes.
You've identified.
We can come
where
up
it's
with it.
coming from. Just asking.
The amendment has where it's coming from.
I'd make a motion to put it on the consent agenda then.
We have a motion and we have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is G9, Solid Waste Management Scrap Tire Disposal Contract with U.S. Tire Recycling, page 108.
Chairman White, Board of Commissioners, we come today before you to request approval of a contract between Cabarrus County and U.S. Tire Recycling for scrap tire disposal program. This is actually a renewal of the current contract we have with U.S. Tire. The funding for this program is actually generated from the tire disposal tax on each tire that's purchased in North Carolina. The merchants are required to collect the tax revenue from the consumer during tire purchase and submit it to the state. And in turn, the state allocates the revenue back to the counties based on per capita, which covers the disposal program for the county.
If that's all right, I'll add very briefly, the Cabarrus County has been in a very good position with regard to the cost of this because we happen to have a tire recycler in the county. Most counties have to pay considerably more money to have this done than we do, and a lot of it has to do with the transportation costs.
Does U.S. Tire take tires outside of Cabarrus County, or is it just in Cabarrus County?
No, U.S. Tire takes from the western portion of North Carolina. There's only two recycling tire facilities in North Carolina. One of them is Central Carolina Tire, and one of them is U.S. Tire. Both of them owned by the parent company. U.S. Tire currently takes all tires from the western portion of North Carolina, and Central Carolina Tire takes the tires from the eastern portion of North Carolina. There's 98 counties that deliver their tires to these two companies in North Carolina. So they.
Any other questions? Have a motion to place this
I
under
move
consent
it on
agenda?
consent agenda.
Have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you all very much. G10, Tax Administration, Commerce, update on the Cabarrus Rowan line. That is page 116. Why don't we do this? This will probably take more than 10 minutes, correct?
I would guess
Probably.
with questions, yes.
Let's take a break. Take about a 15-minute break. We're back to order now. Mr. Marshall, Mr. Wiesner?
Well, as most of you are probably already aware, we've been working with the state in resurveying the county line since the early 90s and trying to get a new survey and to clarify exactly where the county line is. And over the years, we've clarified the Iredell County line, the Mecklenburg County line, and we've completed the Union County line with the exception of Union County actually adopting the resolution and getting the maps recorded. In the process of doing these surveys, we've located the corners for Rowan County, both of the corners, and the line between those two corners is a straight line, so we know pretty much exactly where the line is. And there has renewed interest recently from Rowan County to move forward with this and get this resolved. So that's where we are. We have contacted the state, and they have put us on a schedule to have the completion of their work done. They've, like I said, they've located the corners, but they have not completed the actual survey and placed the monuments for that line. So they've got us on the schedule. We're not first on the schedule. There's a few other counties in front of us, but from what I gather from it, you may know more about this, I don't think it's going to be a long wait for them to complete this work. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan. He has done a map, beautiful map for us, and we'll talk
Actually,
about that.
Colleen Nelson on our staff did the beautiful map, and there's an aerial also, but I know it's going to be difficult for you to see it from here anyway. I'm going to walk up there in a minute and just give you some of the, I guess, kind of a general overview of how the line would be projected to, or how it would move if we accept this, or if you accept this resurvey. I will note that the Rowan County Board of Commissioners have a resolution before them today to appoint a special commissioner and ask that this line be resolved. And that's one thing the state asked us to do, is that both counties pass that resolution. Of course, Mr. Wiesner had already presented that to you. So Cabarrus County's handled that part, and Rowan will have theirs in place. But I'm going to walk up here and Mr. Baxter pointed out, if I didn't want to be heard, I didn't have to use this, but he told me it was live, so it is. This is the Rowan Stanley Cabarrus point, which is a known point, and they found the monument. It's actually in 3 sections, so this is the easternmost section of the county line, the middle portion, and then running through Kannapolis, and this far corner is a point at Iredell, Cabarrus, and Rowan that was found when they were doing the Iredell County line. When you get to this western portion, the line we currently project, and there's actually 2 lines here that Rowan and Cabarrus project different lines in some cases. So what Colleen has mapped is, in places you'll see there's 2 different lines shown. One is the Rowan projection of the county line as it exists, one is Cabarrus. But this is the line if you use the correct monument and go straight. So you can see on this eastern portion, or on this western portion, that there is an area that is currently Cabarrus County that would become Rowan County if this new line is accepted. And that continues to get smaller and smaller until you get really into Kannapolis. This is the Loop Road. And then, just for point of reference, this is all Kannapolis School District, by the way, in here. But of course, the research campus, the buildings are shown for that. And then the lines run fairly close to each other all the way through the rest of Kannapolis, and really until you get, start getting back out towards I-85. Actually, in a portion of Kannapolis here, around Jackson Street, you begin to see, again, some divergence between what would be the line as resurveyed and where we both projected. So that portion would be areas that's now currently shown in Rowan that would become Cabarrus. And that is true really all the way through the center portion of the county. On past Faneuil's Church Road, this is Mount Pleasant Road North. And then again, it gradually comes back to a point, gets smaller and smaller to where it comes back to the existing point. So we projected it correctly here, but there is a large area to the east of Kannapolis that would become part of Cabarrus if this line is accepted. And in fact, when Colleen did the calculations, approximately 300 acres would move from Cabarrus to Rowan, and about 1,000 acres would move from Rowan to Cabarrus. And I realize that's difficult to see. There's also an aerial that Colleen has put together, but it really, if you wanted to look at it more closely to get a better idea, I would certainly invite you to come to our offices and we could sit down with you and look at the map more precisely. And that way you can see the road names and with those aerials begin to get an idea of structures involved. One of the other things that has come up as we were looking at the daily bulletins that the manager forwards, The Orange County, Alamance County boundary has also been resurveyed. It's one of those that they found a fair amount of discrepancy. And there is a bill that has been introduced in this session that provides a kind of a graduated transition of those properties from one county to the other and addresses all those services affected by it. So I think, and this is the first time I've seen something like this that really showed there's a range certainly of options in terms of adopting a new line and how you begin and complete that transition. And it would, certainly recommend that as a model and starting point for us.
Well, that's what I was talking to Mr. Wiesner about before we sat back down, was, the concerns of the people who live and are affected by that change with their children in different school systems, et cetera, et cetera. And he was mentioning the options. So how do we get the options, and when do we need those options, and do we vote and have authority to choose or request those options in a state bill?
The state law, the statute that deals with an uncertain or disputed boundary is very general. It gives you that basic outline on how to handle if you agree and then if you disagree. But those kind of points in between, I think, are not very precise, and that's why it took special legislation for them to do something like this. So I think our next step is obviously for OAN to agree. We believe their commissioners will agree to the resurvey, and for us to get on the state schedule to begin to get a more precise survey, including monumentation at some of those intersections or major roads, and then from there determine how many structures are affected, who those specific property owners are. And you had asked, of course, that we meet with them during that process to go through that, to look at how many students are affected in each one of the school systems. Robert Klutz was able to determine for us how many students would potentially be affected on that western side, because that's the area that's currently Cabarrus that would become Rowan. But we would need Rowan schools to complete the other side with students who would be in Rowan now and could potentially be in Cabarrus. So we would want to put all that together. I think at that point we would come back to you with a proposal to do something, look at how we could do something similar to this and introduce that to the local delegation.
As soon as the public hears that this issue is an issue, people along that line or in that area of the county are going to become concerned. So how do we be proactive about that so that they understand that, there are options that we will, consider, and they will be heard. We're not just going to arbitrarily take a ruler and say, here you go. At least that would not be my preferred manner of doing it.
I've seen some examples where they've used the frequently asked questions on their website as the primary source, but certainly I think contacts to the tax office and our office and these maps would give us the opportunity to explain that to them, and then we will go out and actually hold public meetings as we move forward with this. You're right, the Mecklenburg line, when that was resurveyed, there was considerable interest, put it that way.
And I also think that with the different news media, that when it does get reported, that there are several options out there, and we're not selecting any one over the other, and we certainly want to have these public hearings. We do want to have comments. We do want to hear what they have to say and try and figure out what's the best solution as best we can.
And when you say when it gets reported, it's being reported right now. So that's why I said that.
Right.
But let's get out there and make.
Right.
Because you'll be flooded with calls otherwise.
And I believe the Rowan County line issue was reported once before, was it not, Jonathan, back several years back, where we kind of got to this point of having these discussions. And so I think I had a copy of a newspaper article that was done at that time. So at least people are somewhat aware that this issue is here.
I know you said we're waiting on the state to kind of tell us where we get in the queue, but what kind of timeline are you looking at? I mean, how far out do you think it would be that you would hope that we would be at a point of talking to the landowners and trying to come up with a resolution with Rowan County? Are we looking a year away or 6 months away? Or? I wouldn't hold you to it.
I'm guessing within the year. I'm expecting that they would kind of finish the work later this year and give us the line for us to start looking at.
And I think at that point, once we know precisely what it is, we have this projection of it now that we can use, but once we have that more precisely with it marked, then we can answer questions more specifically. But in the interim, certainly we can use these maps to discuss it with anyone who's interested and wants to see it more precisely, come in and look at it. And the Mecklenburg line took some time, because it is a survey, but then it has to be produced for recording, and both boards have to pass a resolution agreeing to it. And at that point, I certainly wouldn't recommend the resolution, or I don't believe either of us would recommend the resolution until you had completed those terms that you wanted to follow.
People that have been affected by the proposed line, or the line that is thought to be in existence now, have been addressed or helped in every way we can?
There is a development along that line, and they would like us to move forward, or like you and the ROAM board to move forward specifically on their property. But I think the direction we had proposed was that because this is a larger issue, that you deal with the line, the entire line and looking at that survey. There was a specific issue that developer had for his own personal home, that if this new line is accepted, it would be in Rowan, but currently that property's in Cabarrus. So what he's done is move forward with his permitting and inspections through Cabarrus, so that's in process right now.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Marshall and Mr. Wiesner? Thank you all very much. I know that we all want to be very proactive in letting everybody know what's going on, and we're just trying to figure out what, as best we can, to help the vast majority. But thank you very much for the information.
Thank you.
Next we have is, well, we don't have to do anything under G11 because that's already been set for June the 21st, unless there's an update.
There are.
Ms. Kennedy, and welcome for 1 year.
What you have in your agenda packet is information related to the proposed budget, to hold a public hearing, and also for the adoption on the 21st. Attached, you'll see some budget changes that were made as a part of the budget work session. If we can scroll down to that list. Yes. We can go through this pretty briefly. The first, general services, human services, building projects. These are projects that will be completed this year, so we reduced the budget by $26,000. The local food system coordinator was a new position that was included this past month. It was not part of the original proposed budget. It is included in the new 2011 budget as grant funds. The retirement incentive of $250,000, the county is providing for retirees that are eligible for December 31st retirement. They receive a 3-month incentive plus vacation payout, so this is an addition of $250,000. We removed the old Bethel School project, and also we added the RCC roof of $150,000. The change that was made to the merits of a 50% reduction is also included in the proposed budget of $350,000 reduction from $700,000. The administrative secretary position in soil and water was restored per your discussion. The Arts Council, $13,000 was restored to their organization. We also included contingency for jail overcrowding at $65,000.
That was something that we added that you have not seen. Recently, our population has been up, and they're kind of anticipating that during the summer is kind of when a lot of activity happens, and so that's there just in case.
Also, we increased board contingency to balance the proposed budget of increase the contingency of $3,500. And also, there was a revenue adjustment for a criminal justice partnership grant. We received an increase of $4,000. So these are the changes to the proposed budget that was discussed during workshops. Also included is the updates to the 5-year plan. Per your request, Plan C and D removes the quarter-cent sales tax in fiscal year 2012. Yes, C and D.
All the other changes you discussed, by the way, are reflected in A and B, so that if you look at the tax rate changes, you'll see that that's lower than it was originally.
Are there any questions so far on budget changes or the 5-year plan? And then the only thing else that's attached is your budget ordinances that will be adopted on June 21st. There are revised, the fire districts was revised due to the updated evaluations that were received on Friday. And also the general fund, the general fund budget is also included in the supplemental section of your agenda.
Any questions for Mrs. Kennedy? We do not need a motion, I believe, to set it on for June the 21st, since it's already been set. So that's ready to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Under G12 is the potential new locations of the new county office space for the following county departments: Board of Elections, Transportation, Veteran Services, Parks Administration, and EMS. This is on 133. Mr. Downs.
At the direction of the board, last month, we sent out a notice to those that were still participating in the proposals and told them that we were going to come down to a final day of proposal submittals, and that was May 21st. What you have in front of you, we distributed the packages to you for your review, but we ended up with an additional one added today by Dennis Shates and Danny Boss. That made 13 different proposals that you would have to review. We can go through them individually, or I can just ask any or answer any questions that you have. I'm not sure how detailed you want to get into the review of these different locations, but we did have the Carolina Group offered 2 proposals at 2 different locations. Carpenter Commercial Group had 2 proposals, both one land and one was a purchase and one was a lease. Harris Morrison Company has a proposal for the lease at the old creamery. Locust Real Estate at the off Highway 29 at the shopping center out there. They've had two options for us. J&J Commercial Properties had 2 options. One located on Executive Drive and one on Dale Earnhardt Boulevard. Actually 3, and then a third one, an abbreviated version of one at 280 Executive Drive. And then the Cabarrus County property, it would be the 7th floor of the Sheriff Administration Building. And then, of course, the last one that I just noted was the Honda car dealership building out there on 29. It's about 20,000 square feet of office space, and then several thousand more of potential warehouse space, and that would be a proposed lease. And that's where we're at. Some of the board members had the opportunity to visit the old Creamery building last week. You're familiar with the 7th floor of the admin building as well. The Board of Elections also visited the Creamery building, and I believe from their notes that they like that location. But the associated costs are on your worksheet there at each location. And now we're just looking, as far as staff is looking for some direction that you would like to go. If there's 1 or 2 locations that you want to look at more in depth, if you want to continue to look at some of these other locations, that's fine as well. We're just trying to get some direction on how to proceed.
I had one question when I was looking at this. When we talk about the 7th floor of the sheriff's building, does that $2 million, I mean, if we're removing the elections offices, was this $2 million before you did that, or would that affect this $2 million upfit cost?
That's an
If it's
approximate
not
number.
part of it?
That's just an estimate. That is
Estimate.
to upfit the
Okay.
entire 19,000 square feet, so.
And when you're upfitting that, you were talking about adding
That would-
restrooms and just making it sort of flexible space?
Yes, ma'am. There would be
so
very
that-
few hard walls at all. It would be,
Okay.
except for the restrooms, and then maybe the hard walls in between the departments, the rest would be cubes. The one option that Mr. Day and I discussed as well, if you do choose to move Board of Elections somewhere else, then it may be feasible to not do the other space at this time and just leave those departments where they're at. Because if we go to the 7th floor of the Sheriff's Department, transportation would not move to that location. They would need to stay where they're at or find a new location for them anyway.
And will we get the details on the latest proposal, or if that's not an area, one of interest, I don't know whether we need them or not, but.
At
just
this
curious.
time, it was just that brief description of the 20,000 square feet plus a lot of additional warehouse space available, both indoors and outdoors. I did not, it was, we just
Yeah.
received it this afternoon.
You
prior
didn't
to
have a
the-
lease price or any
No, ma'am.
details? Okay.
No.
In looking at the 7th floor, can you address any concerns regarding access that Mr. Marlowe brought up? You know, he was talking about walking up the hill by elderly people, being able to get up to, not being on the first floor. And I think they're valid points, and if that's going to be one in consideration, how do we address that? How do we make certain that, you know, no matter what the age is, a person with infirmities is able to access to vote?
Those were some of the same concerns that the Board of Elections had as well. In your budget, you're proposing to do a demolition project on the existing jail that would be leveled, and a parking lot, a surface lot would be created there that would be close, that we could provide some spaces in that location. So but they would still have to cross Corbin Avenue. The only other location that parking or the current existing locations would be the parking lot behind on Barbrick and Corbin that the courts use, and then, of course, the new parking lot, but most of that parking lot is going to be consumed with the Sheriff's Department and Emergency Management and those, in some of the state offices. We may move some of those cars that we're currently reserving spaces for in these other lots to get them out of that, to make them more accessible to the public. We're going to move those over there as well. And that would be probation and parole and juvenile justice and those guys.
If the 7th floor is what is selected, is there a way that parking on site or at the law enforcement building can be set aside during voting times? In other words, that instead of every sheriff in Cabarrus County bringing in a patrol car and parking in the parking lot, can, for the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks of early voting through voting, they park in the old lot or they park somewhere else? I mean, is that something that can be, but also in conjunction, we're talking about tearing down the old jail, which will free up a tremendous amount of parking right there, that we could designate those for anybody to park there and walk straight across, right?
And there, as well as the current location for where the elections office is, there are already some parking spaces there that could be reserved for that purpose. But we need, I would suggest that we need to demolish that building before it crumbles under its own weight. And then, you know, we can look at the possibility of adding some parking there, and with a crosswalk nearby, that would be safe.
Yeah, the logistics of, we will probably need to keep some of this lot across the street in a secure, just for the court personnel, the DA's office and the judges as well. So we would have to work that out where we could put a gate up for part of it and leave the rest of it as public spaces that we could designate, especially during election time.
During election time, we could cordon it off and have it
That's-
reserved for elections.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying, is
sure.
that is that if anybody, no matter age, when they do come down to vote, they need to have the easier access, the more likely they're going to vote, and that's what's important, is to get as many people to vote as possible. And just because it's on the top floor, I don't want that to be a deterrent. I'm sorry, also, if we do the 7th floor, that brings in more than one department, number one. It frees up leases that we're under right now for those buildings that we're no longer obligated to, or we would be able to get out of them.
Well, the building right now of the departments that we were moving is transportation, and transportation would have to stay where they're at. They would not be able to move.
But if we go to the creamery, then only the Board of Elections can move to the creamery. We're not going to be able to put everybody into the creamery? Or can we put everybody in the creamery?
There was options that we could do that. The option in front of you right now is just for the old creamery building, which is 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
And that was proposed just for the Board of Elections. The Morrisons had proposed the Coke building as well earlier with
Right.
all of the ability to move everybody there. So.
Okay.
As I was just looking at these, the old county building, the Carpenter building, has twice the square footage of the creamery and does have the option for purchase. I looked at the Harris Morrison building, which had, and there's no purchase option. And if my figures were right, with the rent that they gave increasing 3% a year, and our share of the upfit, that after 5 years was going to be $822,000, close to $823,000. I'm just wondering if that's a wise thing, because then you don't own the building. You spent the
Well,
money, but you don't own the building.
Remember, if we look at the Carpenter property, that would not include Board of Elections. We would have to build another building, which was $4 million?
Yes.
$4 to $5 million.
Oh, that's
on top
right,
of
I'd
that.
forgotten them.
Right
Okay.
beside it
All
is
right.
was what we had
Piece
talked
of the
about.
pie
you know
that
what
I
I mean?
didn't remember. Okay.
So on the 7th floor, we would move Board of Elections, Parks and Rec,
Parks, yeah, they're administrative offices, yeah.
Okay.
The ones that are in the current.
right, and then we would sell that building.
Yes, ma'am.
And then anybody else?
EMS administration.
EMS, okay.
And we're slated to move the veteran services over there, but we wouldn't have to. There's room for them. And then there may be some square footage left that we could actually relocate some of the state offices out of the courthouse as well.
Okay. One of the questions I have, I'm sure you can answer this, Pam's not here, but during the budget talks, I believe the money to upfit the 7th floor is out of one pot of money, but the money to lease is out of a different pot of money, which then would impact the budget if we were to do a lease.
Right,
That's
the money
correct.
for the upfit would come out of the capital reserve, and that money is designated actually by statute once you establish a capital reserve to be built on, to be used for a capital project.
So that
Rather than
was
a recurring project, right?
Yeah, that was one of my major concerns was, if we lease anywhere, then we are impacting our budget on that amount, and we would need to change the budget, because there'd be a lease payment in there, you know, for whatever the amount is, and whichever one it is, whichever option we would pick, if that were the case. I mean, I'm leaning towards the 7th floor, and the only reservation I have is just to make sure that we have accommodations for people to be able to vote. And Commissioner Caruth and I visited the Creamery building earlier last week and together and talked about it a little bit afterwards. You know, I don't know if there's a space in the rotunda that could be used for a short term, and you've got the little loop driveway here, and we've got parking deck down below that could be also possibly used if this was, you know, a second site to be able to do the one-stop voting.
There are a couple of options available, and one of them is actually the lobby of the jail annex. It's a secured place so that the stuff would be safe, the equipment would be safe. But it's not the lobby itself is not used, it's not open to the public, so it's a storefront, it's right behind a bus stop. There's a lot of things that make it kind of attractive as a site for that.
I'm gonna weigh in and say I am not in favor of the 7th floor, mainly for the accessibility and the parking. Those two things, to me, just rule it out.
Ms. Myatt, you did mention that the creamery was only listed as a lease. They have
Right.
offered it as a purchase, if we so choose. It was just.
Do you recall
we
what
only-
the purchase
there was
price
no- There was no price.
There was no price?
But they said that they would be willing to entertain them.
I just think it, if we could have, I think there was in their information a lease to purchase option. They didn't give the details, but I
Yeah,
think they
right.
mentioned that they would talk about
as an-
that.
that's true.
My concern about the creamery was that after 5 years, you spend all that money and you don't own the building. But if you can work it out where after 5 years you own the building, with the additional cost. One of the things that I mentioned before about that particular project is that it is a economic development issue in my mind, in that it helps to rejuvenate that part of the town, which could be, the impetus for more things to happen there. And I don't know about the other agencies perhaps moving into the other building. I don't know whether there was some issue about water in that building, but my understanding was that was during the construction, and that is no longer an issue. I don't know whether that's true or not.
That was when the Coca-Cola building was up.
Coca-Cola building.
That was the Coca-Cola, not the
Right.
creamery.
That's why I'm asking,
Yeah.
does the Coca-Cola building still have that issue? I don't know.
I'm not sure, I've not been in there during the rain times, but they said that it was a project in process.
Right.
And that they were.
I'm just looking forward to, I don't know whether you'd have the 7th floor ready for this next election or not, but I certainly know that the election in 2012 is gonna be a tremendous election. And I just can't imagine the traffic and the foot traffic and the parking and that's gonna be a zoo. And it's not gonna get, as we grow, it's not gonna get less people, it's gonna get more.
The urgency as far as the Board of Elections is not for this election. In fact, I think they would prefer to wait till after to make the move. So we would have plenty of time. We would probably have time to do either location and get them in prior to, but it would move them in, and then the election would be right on top. So they would be able to, there's plenty of time to have the construction done and then move in directly after the election.
The others that we haven't even mentioned, I think I sort of eliminated them because of their locations not being as accessible or perhaps as easy to find. I haven't even thought about the Honda building. But that's my comments.
I was told the farther we get away from the center of
Downtown.
Concord, the more pressure is potentially placed on adding one-stop voting locations. And for every one-stop voting location, it costs something $10,000. I don't know if it's a week or for an election. It ends up being quite a bit. And I may be speaking about the number, but it does cost quite a bit to add, so that when the Board of Elections has spoken to us, I remember them saying, if at all possible, the closer to downtown or the center part of the county helps relieve that pressure of having more one-stop voting.
And am I correct in saying that the Board of Elections likes the creamery location?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
I haven't spoken to any of them,
I'm not certain if I spoke to any of them or not, but
and I take that back.
I've heard that.
I didn't.
There
That's
was
right.
a letter
ask them that
submitted to the Board of
question
Commissioners by
specifically.
Giles
Pardon?
Moss. There was a letter submitted to the Board of Commissioners by Giles Moss,
Right.
maybe a month ago or so, something like
Yeah.
that, saying that was their preferred site.
I think that maybe, well, from what I'm hearing is that it's between the 7th floor and the creamery with very little information regarding the old Honda property. But 7th floor and the creamery, so I think that if we can go ahead and put it on for June the 21st for a final discussion and vote, and go forward with it on the 21st so that we can get moving on that.
I'd like the additional information on the creamery as well, as far as a lease purchase.
The lease or the own?
Lease to own.
Okay. We have a motion to place this on the June 21st as addressing the creamery and the 7th floor.
So moved.
We have a second? All in favor say aye. All opposed? With that, I believe that is taken care of all of our new business. Do we have a motion to place the remaining items concerning the consent agenda, the appointments to the boards and committees, as well as any reports to our June 21st session? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed? And I believe that covers our agenda for today. Is that correct, Mrs. Honeycutt?
If I could direct your attention to the page 197, the revision to the Adult Care Home Community Advisory Committee. That was formerly item H1. That was just a placeholder until I heard from the regional ombudsman. I have heard from her and revised that item. It's on page 208 with the respective appointments. So that's been updated. That's new information.
And with that, we've taken care of all the business today. Do we have where is Jonathan? Do we have a motion to adjourn? We have a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Thank you all.